Welcome to Staring into the Abyss with me, Scott Kemper. With me, as always, is Matt Brandenburg.
Hello.
Michael Patrick Hicks.
Hello.
And we have a special guest today with John F.D. Taff.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem.
Thank you for joining.
I've been looking forward to this, so.
It's our first,
coming on.
You're our first guest. We have not had a guest yet, so.
Yes.
Yay
Breaking the
me.
seal.
Right.
Yeah. Popping our guest cherry.
Exactly.
It's a little crazy. Just get ready. We go off the rails pretty quick.
That's okay. I'm usually off the rails, so that's
okay. Our main goal is to have some fun. That's kind of talk some horror, have some fun, and see where the discussions lead. That's kind of what we do.
That sounds good. I am ready. Like I said, I got my coffee, so I'm ready.
All right. So we usually begin everything with what we've been reading, what we've been watching. Who wants to start first? I've been pretty null this week for reading and watching stuff, so I'll be quick for me.
So what the hell have you been doing all week?
Me?
Yeah,
I've been interviewing for jobs all week.
What? Who needs those?
Yeah, I know. Who needs money, right?
We need advertisers, in other words.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, man. Well, I'll get us started because I've had a busy week of reading and stuff like that. I don't think I watched very much this week. But anyway, I finished Doomsday Furnace, which is, I believe, Michael Patrick Kelley. I'm going to totally boff on his name, but I know Kelley's his last name. It's 12-story collection of his. I think I might have mentioned it a little bit last week, but was like the perfect palate cleanser because I'd been reading a lot of darker, kind of depressing stuff, and he just very twisted, very funny horror that is perfect for you want to read something where a guy's getting just bad stuff happening to him, but you want to laugh about it. So that was fun. Let's see. I finished Drive-Through Crematorium, which I think we need to talk about because I know you two at least liked it. John, I don't know if you've read it yet.
I've not read it, but it's got a great title.
Yeah, it's insane.
So it's John Bassoff. He captures dream logic beautifully, which was it. The whole time reading it, at least the first half, felt like I was in a dream. So that helped. But then the second half, maybe the last end, just kind of like shit the bed. And I don't know. I don't think it worked well for me on that front. But it's definitely worth reading. So, and I think we'll have an episode on that one for sure. Let's see. Totally unrelated to horror, but The Adventure Zone. I don't know if you guys follow the McElroy brothers. They do My Brother, and Me, a podcast. They did this whole playthrough D&D live podcast thing. And total dork. This is a total dork moment. So bear with me.
You're among friends, so that's okay.
Yes. They eventually somebody started doing a graphic novel version of their chapters, and second one just came out this week, and I burned through it because it was awesome. So if you're definitely a fan of D&D and just goofiness, it's a good way to go. And finally, I started one of the next paperbacks from Hell books, The Reaping. So,
Bernard Taylor's always a good time.
Yes, not very far in it, but I'm enjoying this very slow setup. Will Erickson kind of talked about it, where he gets so slow and works you in that you don't realize you're in the horror till the very end. And I can see that. So.
Yeah. His novel Sweetheart is very much like that. It's kind of like a slow burn countryside story where things are a little bit weird, but then the last third, it's like, bam, you're in a horror novel.
I like that. That's kind of the way I write. You lull the reader into a sense of false security and then slam their head against something. So, I appreciate that.
Well, this is a good one. So
yeah. I started Saphira, the John Langan book.
Yes.
Which I am really enjoying, and I've been kind of saving it for a nice quiet time. So I'm not that far into it at this point, but I'm really loving it. I really love Langan, so that's what I'm doing right now.
Nice.
I'm jealous of Langan. Langan's just like, every time I read Langan, I'm like, why do we even bother try writing?
Well, Fisherman was a fantastic. I don't write a lot of Lovecraftian stuff, and I don't read a lot of Lovecraftian stuff, but the people who do it, like Langan, that do it really, really well, are just incredible. The Fisherman was just incredible.
Yes. Yeah. That one totally kind of came out of the blue for me, and I was just like, holy crap, what is happening? And I love the whole the double story almost. I think is a really neat concept.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. Yeah, the story within the story. That's always a great hook for me. Yes. So yeah,
nice. I get it.
That's kind of what I've been doing. So how about you, Michael?
Mike, you go.
Pretty light week for me. I read, like Matt, The Drive-Through Crematorium, which I liked quite a bit more than him. I did not mind the ending. I thought it worked pretty well, but we'll get into all that some other time. Other than that, it's just been watching YouTube videos with my 2 toddlers and Dinosaur Train and that kind of stuff. So horrific, but on a very different level.
Yeah.
Totally.
Stuff of nightmares. My week, pretty much my reading this week has been The Boys. I've just been reading The Boys by Garth Ennis.
Nice.
I've fallen down that hole, and it is one of the most fucked up things I've ever read in my life.
Is that the one they're making the HBO show out of?
Yeah, it's the Amazon show, but
the Amazon. Okay.
I like Garth Ennis a lot, and I've never read The Boys, so I was like, with the show coming out, I was like, I might as well just check out the comic, and it is really fucked up. I think Mike's read all of them.
Seen the show.
I think I've read up through all but the last 2 or 3 books. But the show they just announced at Comic-Con this week that they've already renewed it for season 2.
Wow.
A week before it even premieres season 1.
Wow. I mean, they did the same thing for Preacher, though. Like, when season 1 launched, like right before Preacher season 1 launched, they were like, oh, we're doing season 2 as well.
Yeah.
Maybe Seth Rogen just has that clout.
Yes.
Because you got Seth Rogen as a producer, so he probably, he probably has some clout.
Part of his deal.
And then, other than that, I finished, I think up to volume 7 of the Boys comics. And then I've been reading some Junji Ito, continuing on with my graphic novel reading. Have you guys ever read Junji Ito?
Yes.
Not yet.
Which one I read? The fish one, Geo, I think it was.
Oh, Geo?
Geo, yes. Yeah. Basically, dead fish. These dead fish with robot legs start crawling out of the ocean, and everyone
just dies.
Everyone just dies and turns into these giant fish monster things, and there's really some weird explanation about some ancient or some World War II tech that went off and captured dead fish.
Geo's
really bizarre.
Fun, but it's not one of his better ones.
Yeah. I just had to read it for dead fish. I mean, come on. You're the giant shark.
Dead fish. If you want to get into Ito, I'd suggest Uzumaki. Uzumaki's his closest one to kind of Lovecraftian cosmic horror type stuff. But that one's pretty fucked up too.
Yes.
It's pretty much, there's this small town in Japan, and everyone's obsessed with spirals. They end up becoming so obsessed with spirals, they find ways to turn themselves into spirals.
Okay.
And spirals begin taking over the town. There's a really freaky frame where there's this girl with a spiral opening up on her face, and it just opens up more and more and more and more until it sucks in her eyeball.
Yes. There is definitely a lot of that in his stuff. I know that for sure.
Yeah. I think I saw a GIF of that the other day where the eyeball's just kind of spiraling through the circle there.
I've been reading his newest collection, Smash, to have this right here.
Nice.
It's all his short one-shot manga comics. Mixture of funny, some of them are funny, some of them are fucked up. There's no consistent tone. It's just you're either going into one that's fucked up, you're going into one that's gross, or you're going into one that's funny, and you have no idea until you get there.
It's just Is that the one with the hole? Does that one have the hole story where the girl that has all the holes in her face?
No, that's a different one.
Okay,
but I've read that one.
So
this one has a vampire bat one.
Yes, lots of holes in faces.
Yeah, he's obsessed with like body horror and like weird shit happening to people.
I like a good body horror story.
I do too. And even though it's like Japanese comics, I think they relate pretty well if you're a horror fan, not so much into like Japanese comics in general.
Right.
Like he does a good job at capturing like horror and kind of dread and like making you feel like kind of nervous to turn the next page to see what's going to happen. Like there's one comic in here. Dread. It's coming. There's a comic in here I liked a lot, which is called Earthbound. And it's pretty much like people, like I have a picture here, but it's like people, they've committed some sort of atrocity and they're stuck to the place where they've committed this atrocity and they can't move. Like they're just stuck there. And this girl is trying to like figure out what's happening with these people. And she's recently moved to a new apartment because she had a stalker. And this new apartment she moves into turns out belongs to her stalker, which ends up being her boss.
Oh, nice.
And now she's stuck with like an apartment with her boss who's like earthbound, like he can't move. He's just stuck there in this apartment for the crime that he did. Like it's twisted stuff, but it's really good. I highly suggest that. And for movies, all I saw this week was Spider-Man.
Yeah. No, I wasn't. I'm going to go see it tomorrow. Or today.
It is a lot of fun and has probably my favorite post-credits Marvel scene since like the Avengers eating shawarma in the first Avengers movie.
Nice.
But it's a lot of fun.
Good. I'm looking forward to it. It's, again, one of the first times I've been out of the house in a month. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was better than Homecoming, personally speaking. But that's just me.
I never saw that one.
Homecoming's a lot of fun.
Is it?
Yeah.
I like what's his name, but I just was it Tom Holland?
Yeah, Tom Holland.
Never got into seeing it.
Yep.
He's a really good Spider-Man. Like I think he's the first actor to like really capture high school Peter Parker.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, Spider-Man was my jam when I was a kid, so
Me too.
That was the first movie I thought that perfectly captured what the comic books were like when I was reading when I was a kid.
Oh, nice. So, all right, I'm in.
Yeah, it was a good movie.
A really good job.
So if the new one is better than Homecoming, well, yeah, I'm excited now. So that's good.
Because in the new one they have Mysterio, so you have all these cool effects involving Mysterio and stuff. It's trippy.
Yeah, good.
But it's a good time. Excellent. So we want to begin this before we get into the main piece. We want to talk a bit about the fearing first.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that.
We're done with it.
That's what we were afraid of.
No comment. That's all I gotta say. No, that's fine. That's great.
Because we've all read it, we all loved it. We're all waiting for our review copies of book 2.
Oh yeah, he's putting the finishing touches on book 2. I think he was waiting for that Robert McCammon quote.
Right, that's
a hell of a cover blurb.
Yeah, I saw that last night, and I was like, "Damn."
Yeah, talk about serendipity, just bumping into McCammon at StokerCon literally at midnight.
What?
He was all by himself, sitting in a little tucked away corner of the hotel, and me and Brian Kirk. And Brian was a little lit, as we say. And Brian is he's one of those fearless guys. He'll just go up and talk to somebody. And he cornered him and talked with him for a little while. And I came up and talked with him. And then I looked over and Brian's gone. Brian had evidently staggered off to his room thinking that his job was done, introducing me to Robert McCammon. So I ended up talking to him for about an hour, just being him. And gave him the books. He asked for the books. I gave him the books, not thinking that he would actually read them. Thought he was being polite. But he read them and actually read part of book 1 that night because he talked to me the next day and said, I love it. I love it. And I'm like, I didn't even know what to say. So, yeah, getting that quote that blurb from him was awesome. Just fantastic.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So book 2 is coming out August 20th. Tony at Gray Matter has got the ARCs about ready to go. So book 2 will be released to some lucky people like you guys.
Yay!
And then we'll see how much you like it.
Oh, no.
Well, I can tell you already, I am not going to like that wait between books 2 and
Well, that was kind of the big, when I presented, when I finished the book, it was about a 550-page book. And what I got from a lot of the big houses was, you're not a big enough name to carry off a book this size. Okay, whatever,
Yeah.
So I decided, I kind of, it was that book that kind of helped me make my peace with, if I end up being a bigger name in the indie press, I'm okay with that. If that's how I slide into my grave, I think I'll be okay with that. So I offered the book to Tony at Gray Matter, and he read it, and he's like, "Wow, this is a big book. What would you think about serializing it?" And I hadn't thought about it at all. So we looked at, we both kind of looked at how we would do it, and if how many books it would be, and where the natural split points were, and we ended up rearranging some chapters to accommodate that. But I think it's worked out pretty well. Yeah, and we kind of knew that people would, even if they liked the book, they would get annoyed that they had to wait for the next part. But that's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's not a bad problem.
I've been gratified that book 1 has received the kind of reviews and the kind of notice that it has, because man, you're doing a serial book. If people don't like book 1, you're screwed.
Yeah, right. It's right. It's scary to kind of think of that.
Yeah.
But I've been gratified, so it's cool.
Now, by the time this episode actually airs, book 2 will probably already be out.
Yeah.
We'll be waiting on book 3. Maybe you don't want to answer this, or maybe you guys don't know yet. Is there a plan eventually to collect them all as a single title?
I've been told not to discuss that.
Okay.
Fair enough.
And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so buy the individual books immediately,
Right.
as soon as they come out.
Yeah. I think part of this thing is the Tony's trying to create an event out of this rather than just a normal book release. It's this whole, from the summer to the winter of this year, this kind of whole event of, rolling these titles out and having people anticipate the next part. So fingers crossed that this is all going to work.
Well, and it's a neat concept. I've been thinking about it recently because you have like Netflix and all these shows that you can binge now. So you're doing the exact opposite,
right,
which is great. Because I remember, you'd watch the X-Files back in the 90s and you're like, I can't wait all week to watch the next episode. Or Star Wars is another one. It took 2 years. I mean, obviously there's a huge gap, but it took 2 years or so between them. And I appreciate that. You're doing that. I think Paperbacks from Hell they did that every month, a new one. Even something like Fangoria, which could be an every month issue, is a quarter issue. So yeah, I think it's an awesome concept to go with, and I appreciate it. So
good. We did have to rearrange things a little. When you present somebody with one big book, and they're going to be able to read right through, it's a different experience than it is when it's broken up and you've got 6 weeks in between each chunk. So actually, we had Alan Baxter, who is a great writer, and I met him last year and have developed a friendship with him, and he read the book split up, and he had some advice about moving some things. So we actually moved some chapters a little further up, knowing that you're not going to be able to just sit down and read the whole thing in one fell swoop. You're going to have to wait. So book 2 has got some chapters that were moved up from book 3.
Okay.
Just to establish a second group of characters who you would have met further along, but we thought, you kind of really need to meet them a little closer since we're splitting it up. So, but I think it'll work well. I think if you like book 1, my sense is you're going to have your socks knocked off by books 2.
Nice.
Yeah.
Are we getting an explanation about the butterflies?
No, a lot of this stuff, those little. There's going to be a lot of these little vignettes in there that deal with specific fears. And I knew that I couldn't cover everything, but I wanted to give you a kind of a sense that there's this larger picture of, these big fears coming, like the big natural disaster kind of fears that almost everybody has a fear of, but these smaller kind of personal fears.
Yes.
So I'm trying to do a blend of them both to kind of get the idea of what's going on. So
yeah, no, it's definitely great, and it definitely had me thinking about my terrible fear dolls. So I was like, okay, at least it was butterflies and not dolls, because I don't know how much further I would have been able to read.
Well, I did the butterflies. My niece, a niece of ours, is terrified of butterflies. So I did that for her. So there were a couple of things that I weaved in that were specific to people that I know. So
no, that's cool.
Perfect.
Are there any killer dolls we can look forward to? Or
no killer
maybe you
dolls.
can add them into book 3?
I might when I go back. Yeah, we're still tinkering with book 3 and 4. The other nice thing about this, the other nice thing about this is as we go along, we can tinker with the books that haven't been released yet. Which is kind of nice. It kind of gives us a little.
Yeah.
It kind of gives me a chance at another little opportunity to tweak it.
Yeah, I like that. That's good, because then you can see what's going on and kind of make it. I think that's pretty sweet.
Yeah,
I mean,
we got some big things coming. I mean, book 2 has got a couple of. I think it's going to be interesting for me to see how people react to book 2, because I can't tell you why, but there's going to be a biggie in there. And then, book 3 and 4 obviously have, some big things. Obviously, book 4, I hope, has the biggest thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's not a small premise. This is a very big idea,
it is
high concept.
It's a high concept idea, and it really took me a long time to write it because of that. Because, frankly, the size of the book and the size of the idea petrified me as a writer. So it took a long time to put. It was like 5 to 7 years for me to write this thing. So
wow. I mean, there hasn't been a post-apocalyptic or even apocalyptic epic in a while, so it's kind of cool to see
Yeah, and then it's me, and then Chuck Wendig gets to go and release his big old book at the same time.
What the hell? Come on.
I've got it. I haven't started it yet, but I like Chuck Wendig, so I'm sure it's going to be great. And
I'm listening to the audiobook
completely
right
different
now.
premise. So
I'm in the audiobook for Wendig's right now, and I'm hooked.
Good.
It's really good.
I've seen
like
almost nothing but good about
Yeah.
it, so I'm looking forward to that.
Now, we know that his has a very different premise. Yours is probably the most original take I've ever seen on an apocalypse.
Thank you.
Where did this come from? You're using people's fear as a global, what I'm presuming will be a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
I
mean, we concentrate mostly on the United States because,
Right.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I didn't want to make the book bigger. But I was reading, I do a lot of reading outside of horror, mostly history and that kind of stuff. And 7-8 years ago, I was reading a lot of Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, I guess, the mystic psychoanalyst, and his theories of the collective unconsciousness of mankind and archetypes and all that kind of stuff really stuck with me. And that's where I got the idea of, what if there is this kind of metaphysical bowl of fear that has collected from all of mankind over the centuries, and now this thing has to re-empty. It has to empty itself to reset itself. So it was a great way. When I hit on the idea, I thought, well, this is excellent, because this is a great way for me to throw everything and the kitchen sink into a book. I mean, I can throw every freaking horror trope, everything, and there were some things I chose not to cover. I mean, it's like, should I do zombies? No, I don't like zombies. I have an offhanded remark about zombies somewhere in the book. I don't remember which book it is, but I was able to incorporate a lot of different fears and a lot of different tropes, and that's kind of why I refer to this book as sort of my master's thesis in horror, because I covered it all.
Yeah.
So
No, I like, that's a great concept, the master thesis of horror, because I think that's what it is. At least what I've gotten so far. I think that's...
Well, I appreciate it. And like I said, I've been gratified at the reaction to book one. So, and my attitude has always been, if you liked the introduction, as you get further into the story and the story develops and you really see what's going on, I think people are going to like it. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
I always worry about book 4 because of the end and how people react to the end of things.
Right.
Especially after coming off of Game of Thrones and seeing, the reaction to the wrap up of that. You think, oh God, people are going to get so picky about the end, and it's not the end that they wanted, or it's not the end that they saw. So, but I feel pretty good about it.
I think with the Game of Thrones ending, this reminds me a little bit of what Robert Kirkman was saying, where in the final issue of The Walking Dead, which I stopped reading a long time ago, but I bought the final issue just because I wanted to see how it ended.
Sure.
And in his ending, in his afterward, he's writing about endings, and he's saying he wanted this ending to be a surprise because he hates reading a story and knowing the ending is coming, and he hates it when the story feels like it's in its last act.
Right.
So with Game of Thrones, we know it's ending. They told us this is the last season. We know there's only going to be this many episodes, so it's there's a crunch time of how much they can fit in.
Right.
Where it's if it's a more flowing natural ending, it feels a bit more rewarding than if you're reading or watching something with the idea this is the last one, this is the end.
Well, unfortunately, when you get to book 4, you're going to realize this is the end. There are certain things going on towards the end of the book that you realize this is all coming to a head. But it was important to me when I thought of the ending that the ending had to be true to the story. You know what I mean?
Of course.
I don't want to come out so far out of left field that people go, that doesn't even make any sense with the rest of the story. It's got to fit into the theme that I've already established with the story. So I think it does. I'm hoping it will satisfy people at the end. But I feel pretty good about it. I do feel pretty good about it.
I'm definitely excited to get my hands on the next 3 books once I do get my hands on them.
Yeah, when Tony told me he was only going to release the ARCs as a serial too to reviewers and everything, I thought, oh my God, you're gonna piss these people off so bad. But he's like, I can't trust, and he's to some extent he's right. He's like, I can't trust reviewers, the broad swath of reviewers, to contain spoilers if I give them all 4 books at the same time. So I think he's right, but I certainly get the the anticipation and the anxiety and the sort of I gotta have this now.
Yeah. Well, and the nice thing with that too is if somebody had all the books, they might do a big review after this book, and then never touch it again.
Exactly. It's I think it's a good thing. Tony sent me a note last night after he released the thing about the McCammon quote and the cover of book 2. That, he's like, I think we made the right decision. People are talking about this, and, they seem to be very anticipatory of book 2. And so that's good. That's what we wanted. So
exactly.
Now, are you ready for the series to be done so we stop bugging you as to when the next book is coming out?
No, I think it's going to be great. Tony's got my next book in the hopper, which is a completely different book. I wrote this. It took me 5 to 7 years to write this big, huge, sprawling, epic kind of novel. And the next novel I got coming out through Grey Matter is called He Left. And it's about as different as you can get. It's a very focused, personal, nostalgic coming-of-age novel. So I'm anxious to get that out because I think that is so far removed from the Fearing. But I think it's also something I think that people will really, really enjoy. Nice. Who doesn't like a good coming-of-age horror novel?
Exactly. Yeah, those are great.
Yeah, so I've got that going on. And then the book that I'm working on right now is going to be my kind of ode to haunted houses. It's going to be my big haunted house book. So
nice.
I'm looking forward to that, too. It's nice to be able to jump into all these different kind of completely different horror setups.
So we'll be continuing to bug you as to when the next book is coming out after the Fury.
Hopefully. And then after that, I've got the follow-up to The End and All Beginnings that I've been working on for a while. It's a new collection of 5 novellas. So
sweet.
That's probably 2021, I would think. So yeah, it's nice to be able to kind of look ahead for me and say, this is what I've got going on. So it's
that's
cool.
Awesome. Yeah. So I have the big question, which will lead us into our nice Clive Barker discussion, which is we all read The Dread.
Mm-hmm.
Did you take some inspiration from The Dread for The Fearing?
In the sense that I think that Barker is one of my touchstones as a horror writer. When I got into horror, I had come into horror out of, there was this progression of me as a reader that I started off reading comic books, Marvel, only Marvel,
only Marvel,
Marvel. And then I moved into science fiction from that and read a lot of, like Asimov and Clarke and those kind of people, Heinlein. And then I moved into fantasy, read a lot of Tolkien and Stephen R. Donaldson and people like that.
Oh, nice.
And then from that, I moved into horror. And the first couple of horror books I read were obviously King at the time, because this would have been the late 70s. But then right after King, the next author that I got into was Barker. And my gateway to Barker was the Books of Blood.
Yes.
And I've always been a real big fan of short stories in horror, because I really think short stories are the kind of the sweet spot for horror. And, so the Books of Blood, just like Night Shift, blew me away when I read it. And Dread has always been one of my absolute favorite Barker stories. And I was reading it last night because I read it and I thought that one big line in there about, the first line, there is no delight the equal of dread. I mean,
yeah.
I think that line itself must have just hung in my subconscious for 30 or 40 years, because that sort of encapsulates everything that I believe about horror. That when I write, I try to use that sense of growing dread more so than gore or monsters or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know that I did it consciously, but I think subconsciously that has hung in my subconscious since I read it.
Well, I can see that for sure. I definitely, and there's a lot to unpack on that one, but to go into the concept of the slow build, that was definitely like the thing I noticed, because you're reading it and the first section is just them at a bar,
right,
talking about it, and then even like it gets kind of creepy there with the pictures of the girl, and then it gets into the tunnel or shaft thing, and I'm just like, holy crap, how did I get into this? And
right.
It's crazy. and it's exactly what it's perfect, because you're not expecting it. You're like, oh, this is just going to be a big conversation and an exploration of dread, but then it goes there, and then even goes a little bit further, and I can totally see that.
Yeah, no, like I came into Clive Barker a very similar way that you came into Clive Barker, John. Like when I got into reading, I read lots of Marvel comics in the 90s. Like that was my jam. And then high school, I was really into sci-fi. Read all the classics, got into fantasy. I read Dune like my sophomore year of high school, and that was like one of my milestones. I went into Stephen King, and then I read a lot of King, and I just heard the name Clive Barker, so I bought Books of Blood. Like I was like maybe 20 at the time, 21.
Right.
And I was just floored. Like from the first story, I was sold. And I've been a huge Barker fan ever since.
Oh yeah. 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 And going back to what you were saying, I think that in addition to that line floating around in my subconscious, I think that this story perfectly encapsulates my approach to horror too, which is you lull the reader, you give this slow build up to the reader, which is not horror. It's you just laying the groundwork for the story. And then before they realize it, you're in horror all of a sudden. And you're like, what the crap is going on here? Because this story goes from this very slow buildup of, like you said, we're talking to the two guys are talking in the bar. There's some classroom stuff, and then all of a sudden becomes like the Pit and the Pendulum. You're just in it. And you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
I like that, and obviously that's kind of the way I write. So Dread has always spoke to me. Yeah,
I love the. I guess we're going our route. Stephen King actually was kind of an early talking about what was it, Night Shift and all those. That was, I think I had mentioned it once before. It was like 5th grade. Our teacher read, it was the Little Green Men or the Little Army Men.
Yes.
The Hitman and all that. And after that, it was hooked. Though I did like a weird route of not watching all the TV movies because that was right when It and The Stand and all those.
Right.
Even like the weird, like the Golden Years or something like that. I don't know if anyone remembers that one.
Yes.
But then, going into the route with Stephen King. Clive Barker, I actually jumped into a little late. I used to work at a Walden Books. And it was I don't know if you ever read his Aberrat series. That was kind of Clive Barker's young adult stuff. We got an advanced reader's copy of that and picked that up. And it has his artwork in it, which, it's Clive Barker's art. It's amazing. And then after that was I jumped in. I picked up, I actually got In the Flesh, which was fun. And then The Great and Secret Show. And then kind of, go down that route. But surprisingly, now is the first time I actually bought Books of Blood. It was always one of those ones where I'm like, I'm going to get that, but just, there's always another book to get. And then
sure.
This I appreciate. Thank you for making me buy this because I've been wanting it for years.
Well, it's got so much good stuff in it. The Midnight Meat Train and Rawhead Rex and
Pig's Blood Blues.
Just this wonderful, wonderful, classical horror stuff.
Yeah, it's been on my TBR for a good couple decades.
And it runs the gamut too. Like each story is something different. Like you have comedy stories in here, like The Yattering and the Jack is hilarious.
Yes.
Then you have like Pig Blood Blues, which is like a murder mystery that gets really fucked up pretty quickly.
True.
There's some erotic stories in here as well because it's Clive Barker. That's kind of part of the course with him.
Right.
Yes.
But it runs the gamut of all different types of horror. Like there's something in this book for everybody, no matter what type of horror person you are.
Right. I agree.
But to get back kind of into Dread, I think talking about the beginning part. So we have this one college student. We're never really sure. Is Quaid?
Right.
Quaid.
You're not sure.
He's auditing.
Yeah. And they're talking about fear and they're talking about dread and all that stuff. And it's, you're kind of thinking, okay, this is just there's something going to happen. And of course there's a girl and that gets into the jealousy bits and pieces, which that didn't go the way I thought I was going to go, obviously. But so it's that kind of slow build into then eventually Quaid's like, oh, by the way, I took some pictures. You should really come over and see them. And the pictures go. I kept watching the pictures. I'm like, oh, don't eat that meat. Don't eat that meat. That's going to be gross.
That had me squirming in my chair quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, the cool thing is that, you get this slow lull into the story, and then you get the point with those pictures where you're like, well, that's fucked up. Yeah. And then the point with the pit, that's really fucked up. And then the end is like, holy crap.
That's fucked up.
Right. It just keeps escalating, which is cool.
It's a beautiful escalation. I love how it progresses from this kind of a small note kind of story, and then it just escalates into this wonderful bit of psychological violence and then outright physical violence by the end.
Yeah,
that's cool. That's probably the thing that hit me the most was that that continued escalation. Just when you thought it was going to be, that's fucked up enough.
Yeah.
Holy crap! We're going to jump to the next level here. Now we're going to jump again to the next level.
Yeah, I kept wondering what the hell is he going to do with these guys? What's next?
Right. And it's such a simple, like, he's not even doing much, especially in this day and age. We have Saw, we had all these things. So you're like, oh, the guy's chained to is there going to be some sort of blood? But there's no blood whatsoever. It's just a simple psychological, oh, I'm just going to make you can't hear anymore because I know that's what you're afraid of.
Yeah.
it's simple because he's just locking them in a room with what they fear.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like she fears meat, so what does he do? He cooks her a nice piece of meat, locks her up in a room,
Right.
until she caves in.
Yeah, I guess I really hadn't thought about how much this must have been playing around in my unconscious, because it does seem to be a kernel of the fearing.
Yeah. We thought it was very thematically connected. It was a good pick on your part.
Yeah. Again, totally subconscious, but yeah, it must have been roiling around in there really, really well. So.
Well,
it's
it was a
nice
great story to pick.
Yeah, because it's like, the micro version compared to kind of the macro version of what you have.
Exactly.
And obviously the two are different. You're not doing it. But I was like, I can totally see where it's like watching, seeing a director and then seeing where he's taking inspiration from, she's taking inspiration from. You're like, okay, they're not doing the same thing, but this is where the pieces are. And it's almost, I don't know, for me as somebody wanting to be a writer, or how we go into that route, but like love looking at where other authors get their stuff from. So like Dan's Macabre from, Stephen King is great because it tells you like, here's what I loved. And it's like, okay, I'm going to look at this stuff. So,
well, as a writer, you're a patchwork of everything you've read, everything that has stuck with you. That includes, for me, not just the horror stuff I read, but every other thing, all the history stuff I've read, all the, psychology stuff I've read, like Jung, all the fantasy authors, all the science fiction authors, all the comic books, everything, every movie you've seen, every person you've met, it all gets put into the grinder, and, it comes out eventually.
Yes, definitely. The one thing I liked about this too is, and I don't know if it's just because of what I've been reading recently, but this one is played pretty straight. There's no like subtext to it where you're like, oh, there's going to be a deeper meaning. This is straight him saying like, nope, these two guys and this girl and just dread.
Right.
And I appreciate it. It's kind of, I don't know. It's not muddied by like, oh, I got to look for the deeper meaning in here.
Well, yeah, and it's not muddied by supernatural stuff. It's just straightforward. Yes. It's a very simple story, like you said. It's just very straightforward, and it's people confronting their fears and what happens.
Yep.
But for me, on a deeper level, the more it sat with me is that kind of visceral empathy you feel. It doesn't. When Quaid abducts this girl and locks her up, they never really explore what she's feeling. But even removed, you understand that being locked in this room for days on end, starving, and only having this continually rotting piece of meat as your lifeline.
Right.
It's like by the time she finally breaks down and eats it, the thing's covered in maggots. There's flies in the room. She hasn't bathed in for how long? She hasn't been able to eat.
It's like, 5 days?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably a week. Yeah.
Yeah, and he says, he's like, oh, well, a human can live up to 13 days without eating or something.
Right.
He gives us a big number. So he knew. He was like, oh, I know. I'll get her out eventually.
You can just imagine the horror of that predicament.
Sure. But yeah, when she's done, she just disappears from the story.
She's like,
I'm gone.
Yeah, I mean, that is, for me, exceptionally frightening, even without all the bloodshed and physical acts of violence. It's just all mental.
Right.
I like when she leaves, because, again, we don't see her perspective, but we can definitely tell through the photographs.
Yeah.
But I saw a little bit, when he lets her out of the room, she just sits at the table, eats the food that he gives her, and then she's gone from the story. It's she's just completely broken.
And that whole the photograph thing I love, because we're not in it. We're getting it. It's already happened, and we're getting it through snapshots, which just makes it even, you're filling in those gaps, because it's like every 25 minutes or an hour or whatever like that between shots. So you're like, okay, this is what she's been doing in between. And I love how he's justifying it the whole time. He's like, well, she knew.
We talked about fears.
Yeah.
She knew what she was getting into.
Right.
Yep.
And then, so then we get to the main character, which I believe was Steve.
Mhm.
Yes, Steve.
Yes.
Steve. And so, like, throughout the whole thing, we don't know. We get, like, one line. Well, then we eventually get the story, but we get a line, like, he's got something in his past.
Right.
Yeah,
And then
he's
we get
deaf in one ear.
Yes, or he went deaf. He had, like, tinnitus, or he had
Right.
something happen to his hearing. So you're like, oh, crap, what's this going to be? So he wakes up, and he's in a shaft. His foot's cuffed, and for a while there,
his ears are made so he can't hear
Right.
anything.
well, first they're not, and that's the scary part. Is first he's there and he can hear everything, and then he goes to sleep and he wakes up and he can't hear,
Yeah.
and that's when you're like, oh, he was just testing him bit by bit.
And he knows that he's suspended over something, but he doesn't know how far he's suspended over something.
Right.
Yes.
So that great, completely deprived of sensory input.
And that's, I love that. Like, he's just living in his head, and Clive Barker keeps describing, like, he can hear himself chew, he can hear the mucus, and so you can hear it.
Yep.
It's like, oh.
It's really visceral descriptions, which is one thing Barker does best, is just
Right.
really putting you in that position and making you feel, making you see, making you hear.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's Barker at his best.
Yeah. And when, you feel for the Steve character at the end of his little part of the story,
Yes.
Yes.
where he's getting ready to get off of that platform and he has no idea,
Yes.
how far he is off the floor. And you're like, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like, that's when he says mommy, and that's when Quaid is like, oh, I got it. And then you're like, fuck, this is wrong. Well, then I get the Mickey Mouse mask, and I was just like, where is this going?
It's really fucked up in a horror story when any of the characters say mommy.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's usually the line. You feel, you're like, oh no, this is sad.
Right. I've used that occasionally on mine.
So if I were to believe correctly, the Mickey Mouse mask, that was Quaid, right? That wasn't just Steve absolutely snapped.
No, I think that was Quaid.
Yeah, that was my
it's Quaid.
So
Okay, that's kind of wanted to see that, but then like he's describing. So then, did Quaid draw all those pictures of the axes and dead people, or were those photos? Because do you guys remember that part? So after he wakes up and after the Mickey Mouse guy kind of drags him out, he runs through that room and he finds all these pictures. And they're like axes. There's people with axes in them. There's like a baby with an axe next to it. There's all that stuff. And I guess I wasn't clear on if those were pictures or drawings. And that's kind of where I'm like, oh, is this the Axeman? And who's the Axeman?
yeah, well, that ties into Quaid's whole motivation for doing all of these experiments. Is when we're talking about fear, his big fear is being killed by a clown with an axe.
Fair.
And like I think that room is like kind of Quaid slowly trying to face his own fear.
Right.
Where, like, he's forcing other people to face their fears, and he has a room of his house with all the axe pictures and stuff, and it's kind of him trying to ease into facing his own fear.
That makes sense. All right. Here we go.
And it doesn't go very well, but it makes sense.
It makes sense. But because then it gives the idea to Steve about the axe.
Yes. Well, in like a twisted way, because he doesn't even realize it's coming to him. He's just like, oh, here's an axe.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, his sanity is so blown that he's internalizing this as a completely
normal.
I wouldn't say normal, but a very different filter than
completely. just like the girl was. Quaid doesn't realize, but he's kind of created his own monster. He's created his own monster, right?
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, right.
Yes, yeah. That whole you feel of everything. So Steve, he gets out. But then the cop finds him, and this cop just thinks he's a drunk and starts beating on him. Right. And then when he starts asking for mom again, he's like, "Oh wait,
yeah, right,
you're fucked up. Maybe I shouldn't have punched you."
He's like, "You're not crying." They even make a mention of that. You're not crying for social services or whatever like that. And it's like, whoa, all right, Clive, thanks.
I think it's also because I've been thinking about it since last night when I reread it again. It's also kind of that classic horror warning about exploring things too much. Exploring fear may not be that great of an idea. And certainly, again, as floating around in my subconscious, this speaks to what I was trying to do with the fearing, that, you do have to confront your fears, but, there's probably a much bigger thing than what you're thinking.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So this was great. And, you could look at it for, the fearing, but you can also you could see bits of this in, I mentioned the Saw, you could see bits of that in there. And not too deeply, but you could also even think about, I've been trying to think of other things. You could almost see it a little bit in the Hellraiser stuff where they're kind of using the suffering.
Yeah.
So it's a neat way, because horror stories, they're all kind of about fear,
right,
to an extent. And this one, he's just I'm going to focus on that as opposed to this. Obviously there's a clown type person in this,
right?
But it's a neat. The more we talk about it, the more it's just head explode.
Yeah, exactly. And that's that's the hallmark of a great story. It seems so buttoned down and simple, but when you really start thinking about it and talking about it, it's much bigger than what is just on the page.
Yeah, I think one of the lines that stood out for me at the very beginning, almost near the beginning, and it strikes me as being Barker's thesis as an author, in that we should be frightened to juggle the ideas we should talk about.
I like that too.
Yeah, I can see that. It kind of plays into almost a little bit of the meta stuff.
Right.
Which I'm always wanting to explore. We had In the Mouth of Madness, I think, is a great example from John Carpenter, and that the meta story of, is this real? Is this not? That was I like that. I think that's a pretty cool. This is definitely a good story for people to check out.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a great entry to Barker, because it's not as extreme as some of his other stuff can get.
Exactly. You don't want to jump right in on the Midnight Meat Train or something like that.
Yeah.
That's where I jumped in.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's
Midnight
a hard
Meat Train was where I got my start with Barker.
Yeah, I think, like I said, Aberrat, but I think my first really big foray was The Great and Secret Show, which I think is one of his epics.
Is.
And that one has some stuff in it, too, where I was just what is happening?
I'll never forget the first time I read that one.
I went from Books of Blood to Weave World, which is kind of a nice jump, because he's not quite so crazy in Weave World.
Weave World is more like it's more like a fantasy novel than anything
more like
else.
A horror fantasy, yeah.
Nice.
With lots of erotic elements to it.
Exactly.
There is that.
My start with Barker came from the movie Lord of Illusions.
Okay, that's a good one.
And then after I saw that, I found out he was an author. I was like, oh, well, shit, I got to read this guy. And ended up buying Books of Blood, Cold Heart Canyon, and then I have shiny new book syndrome, so I never actually read any of those.
That happens.
Yeah. So I appreciate this finally a foray into some actual Clive Barker stuff beyond Hellbound Heart was the only other one of his that I've read.
I like Hellbound Heart a lot.
Yeah. I think I haven't read that one. I need to.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I think it's interesting, and maybe this will be a good question for everybody, is because, you have Stephen King, you got Dean Koontz, and Clive Barker, I feel like he is big in the horror community, but, Stephen King you can find at the grocery store.
Right.
Yeah. So, and obviously his stuff doesn't explore some of the more wild erotica stuff that Clive Barker does, but why else didn't Clive Barker make that leap? I don't know if there's an answer to that, but just in an opinion.
I think Clive Barker, Stephen King is tackling ideas that we can all kind of comprehend on a day-to-day life. Clive Barker's looking at bigger picture stuff, where it's the veil behind our reality, and what is beyond that we can see, and what is beyond that we can experience. And he writes these really big narratives that are harder to identify with for a common reader.
This is going to sound horrible, but I think that, King really dealt with suburban America, rural America, small town America, things that American readers can really identify with. And Barker's British.
Yes.
And you hate to make that kind of an observation that American readers can't relate to stuff outside their borders, but I mean, come on.
No, that's very true.
I think that, in my mind at least, I think it's probably both of what you were saying, Scott, and that he's dealing with these bigger issues that a lot of just casual horror readers don't want to get into, and he's dealing with it from a very British sensibility in British settings most of the time.
Yeah,
that they can't relate to. So go back to Uncle Steve here, who's writing about small town USA and stuff that they can relate to. I can get into that.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but wonder the end with the killer clown, how much of that was kind of an ode to Uncle Stevie and It.
Maybe. I don't know
when this was originally written, but I know they're pals, so it kind of got me thinking. I wonder if this was his response to It and having some fun with it.
And talking about that, because you think about it with Pennywise, that was his whole deal, right? Was getting the fear out of you to kill you and take your stuff or whatever like that. And this is a more real version of that.
Right.
So yeah, that's a really good point. I could see that for sure. Yeah, and I think that I agree with all of that, because it's funny when you listen to a lot of horror authors and you listen to what their inspirations were. Everyone brings up Books of Blood, or most everyone brings that up. That's a huge one. So it's just kind of an interesting how that he just didn't jump that line. But I think you're right. I think it's part of the British stuff. He does seem, from what I've read, focus more urban areas. And like you said, Stephen King, he focuses on that small town America thing, which covers a lot of more people. So yeah, that's interesting. Do we have, and this will jump, but do we have Clive Barker of today? Obviously we have Clive Barker, but who would be like a good next? Who's taken that throne of kind of Clive Barker-esque?
That's an interesting question. I don't know.
I have no answer.
I have one answer, and it's only one book by one author, and that's it.
Well, throw it out. Who do you got?
The Sadist Bible by Nicole Cushing.
Nicole is pretty hardcore with her stuff. And I could see that.
I think the Sadist Bible is the most Barker-esque thing I've read, from anyone recently. That's it.
Yeah. That's a tough question to ask.
That my friend J. Daniel Stone, his books kind of have the same kind of literary, poetic kind of writing that Barker does, and they explore a lot of the same kind of worlds. And he's an up-and-coming writer, so I could see that. But I think Nicole Cushing is also a good. Nice. That works.
I have one more actually that I just thought of. He's an up-and-comer. He's also British, and he's also gay. So there's two things in common with Clive Barker.
Trifecta.
George Daniel Lee. He has a collection with Perpetual Motion Machine.
I was trying to remember his name. I know.
Yeah, George Daniel Lee. The book's called Born in Blood, and it's a collection of short stories that a lot of them remind me of some of the stuff you'd find in Books of Blood.
Okay.
I'd say he's pretty close to Barker, but he's more focused on depression. A lot of the stories are metaphors for depression and kind of mental illness and anxiety and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I'd definitely say he's close.
Yeah. It's a tough one because, you can't obviously capture the exact same thing. That's why everyone's unique and everyone has their own stories.
Right.
You can kind of see some trails between certain authors and what they've taken from them. We always talk about the Lovecraftian. Recently, we've been talking a lot about the Thomas Ligotti-esque writers and stuff like that. So it's always kind of fun to see. I don't know if we really have a Dean Koontz person either. So, I don't know if we want one, but, that's up to your own opinion on that one.
We could go with 80s Dean Koontz. I would be okay with that. If it was the metaphysical dogs or supernatural angels, gods.
Back when Dean Koontz actually tried.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But I do think with Barker, like, because I agree with what you're saying about Barker, is like if you talk to any person who's writing horror now, like talk to John, or you talk to Brian Keene, or you talk to like people who have been writing and publishing since like the late 90s, early 2000s, all of them go back to Barker. And like it seems like Barker has, once he published Books of Blood, that made a shift in the horror genre itself.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it was the Holy Trinity. For me, coming up was always King, Barker, and Straub.
Yeah,
completely different. You've got King, who's purely small town Americana kind of horror. You got Barker, who is a kind of a higher level, almost metaphysical kind of horror, and then you've got Straub, who's mostly dealing, well, a lot of times he's dealing with what looks to be real world kind of stuff, bad people doing bad things, but with a kind of a supernatural, sometimes a supernatural hint, and also this overlying meta stuff that's going on in all of Straub's work. So all three of them were very different, but all three of them kind of went into what became me as a writer. So
that's true. I totally forgot Peter Straub was out there, and he's written some awesome stuff. So again, when you start peeling the layers back to especially that time, then you start seeing some of the other authors that kind of pop out, and you're like, oh yeah, they came out with stuff.
Yeah.
This is a bit off topic, but I have a funny Peter Straub story where I went to a used bookstore near my hometown, and they have a horror section that has more than V.C. Andrews.
Yay!
But they had a bunch of Peter Straub. So, like, I picked up all their Peter Straub they had, and I'm going to the register, and she was like, oh, you like Peter Straub a lot? I was like, yeah, he's great. And she was like, I remember when he was being touted as the next Stephen King. Never took on, though. And I'm like, I think he's better, but that's just me.
Yeah. People that know me know that Straub is sort of that's my big author. I love his stuff. And actually, one of my favorite books of all time is The Throat. If you haven't read The Throat, you've got to read The Throat.
I'm in the middle of, I'm about to start the Blue Rose trilogy. I have all three books in the Blue Rose trilogy, so I'm going to start that.
Yeah. The Throat is the last, well, sort of the last one. It's the last one in the trilogy.
Yeah. But I hear it's best if you've read Coco and Mystery.
Yeah, I think you read them in order. That's the best way to go. But yeah, read The Throat. It's phenomenal.
I don't know. Do we have any? Did we dry up Dread? Did we talk about everything?
We mentioned the glorious ending where Steve becomes the killer clown.
Yes.
Yeah.
And kills Quaid with an axe.
Yes.
Yes. That
Quaid's biggest fear.
Yes. That is. It's funny because the meat thing you can kind of see vegetarianism and probably something deeper than that, and then you can see Steve's story, the Axeman clown story. We never get why is he afraid of that?
Right. We know he has nightmares of it every night though. So
it's like where did that come from? Is it just
I do love the descriptions at the end, like after he's hit Quaid twice with the axe. Okay, and they just like Quaid screamed, Quaid begged, Quaid cajoled. The clown didn't hear a word. Yeah. All he heard was the noise in his head, the whistles, the whoops, the howls, the hums. He had taken refuge with no rational argument. No threat would ever fetch him out again, where the thump of his heart was law and the whine of his blood was music.
The end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful justice part where you're good. I want that dude to be chopped up.
Right.
And slowly, he's like, we're going to make this last all night. It's just like, oh, man.
And then even at the very end, I like this one sentence he has in the last paragraph that's just, there was pain without hope of healing.
A certain black comedy to it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like Barker knows how ridiculous it is, too. It's like...
Yeah.
He knows, like, this person becoming the killer clown's ridiculous, and he kind of takes it into, like... you're reading how messed up it is, but you're kind of laughing at it because it's
Right.
just so absurd.
Yeah.
And I think Barker does that masterfully.
He does.
I'd
The
say
secret origin of the Joker.
Right.
I would say for Books of Blood, the Yattering and Jack is the most comical story in the whole
Yeah.
book. Like
Yeah.
that story's hilarious. This one is like a very good black comedy. It's like you're gonna get when he goes there, and then he goes a step even further. You don't expect him to go.
Yes.
And you're laughing.
He's got a pretty strong undercurrent of absurdism in a lot of his stories.
Yeah, he
But
does.
But it's not the absurd. You kind of laugh, but you're kind of like, oh my god. You know, I'm going to get the title right. In the Hills and the Cities.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
That's, you know, it starts out being totally absurd when you get to the horror part of it, but then you're like, oh my god, this is horrible.
Well, even for absurd, like Rawhead Rex is a really absurd story too.
Yeah.
Like if you look at like Rawhead Rex is like Clive's like monster story. He's like the big bad monster. But if you look at the description of Rawhead Rex, he's a living circumcised penis.
Right. I hadn't thought about that. But
It's like toxic masculine rage that's like going on. It's ridiculous.
I will never be able to look at that story in the same way again. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. That's messed up.
It's still like it goes into how absurd Clive is, and even like his movies like Nightbreed. Like I love Nightbreed.
Mm-hmm.
I love Cabal. Like Cabal's one of my favorite Barker novellas, but Nightbreed is just like the effects in that movie. Like what Clive Barker is showing us is really visceral. It's really absurd, but it's always a good time. Like you'll except there's maybe a few Barker books I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
But he's usually a really good time. He's like an author you can trust to give you a good time.
Yeah,
I agree.
But I think we've dried up Dread.
Yeah, Dread.
It's worth checking out.
Yeah, definitely worth checking out.
Absolutely.
Hunt it down. Dark Descent, Books of Blood. It's in one of those at least.
It's in both of those.
Both of those.
Both books are worth owning.
Right.
Like if you want a good history of like horror short fiction, Dark Descent can't go wrong. And Clive Barker Books of Blood is a seminal work.
Absolutely.
Like I'll never forget the first time I read Books of Blood. It changed how I viewed horror fiction. It changed how I viewed everything.
I agree. Me too.
Both those books, if you haven't read them, buy them.
Yes.
I think we're going to do more Barker on this podcast eventually.
Yeah.
I think we have to.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Gives me a kick in the ass to finally read more of them.
Yes, that's good. Most definitely. Yeah, that's I thought about last night because I had finished up. I was in that in-between stage of like, oh, I need a new book to read. And I'm like, should I just start it? And I was like, no, I got these other ones I have to read. So
yeah, I have some arcs I got to finish reading before I really jump into anything else. Like, I really got to finish these arcs.
Yeah. People are waiting.
Dilemma.
People are waiting. That's right.
Well, Apex gave me a couple that I got to get the reviews for. So I got to get those done.
Well, you got to clear your desk for book 2.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Well, book 2 is going to jump right to the top of my list as soon as it goes to my mailbox.
Yeah, maybe let's see. Let's give. All right. So here's what we're going to do. Give us a recommendation for The Fearing, and then give us some recommendations that for some other people to read.
Well, I am big fans. I have my own little squad of authors that I like and I hang around with. I mean, Alan Baxter, if you're looking for a great mashup of supernatural and noir, Alan is fantastic. Read a nice entree into him is Manifest Recall. It's a novella. It's a quick read. It's spectacular. His book Crowshine, his collection of short stories, spectacular. He's got a new book coming out, a new collection coming out from Grey Matter in September, I think. So John Foster, spectacular.
Yes.
His latest book is The Isle, which is like great New England kind of horror.
Yes, I've seen the cover floating around. It looked awesome.
The cover is phenomenal.
Yeah, the cover's great. You've got my pal Mailerman, Josh.
Yeah.
All the stuff that he's doing is spectacular, and I think it's helping to stretch the boundaries of horror, what is considered to be horror. You've got people who are way out there, like Eric T. Johnson, who's fantastic.
Yes.
His collection, yes, Trespassing is fantastic. I mentioned J. Daniel Stone. He's a good friend of mine. Brian Kirk with his stuff. And then you've got, like Jonathan Jans, who seems to be everywhere.
Yeah. Right.
His stuff is great. So, and I've said this before, I think we're in kind of a golden age of horror with all the indie press stuff shouldering. I think the indie press stuff is really shouldering the greater weight of what's going on in the horror world today.
Yes.
And there's so much good stuff out there. There really is just so much good stuff out there.
Now, if I can, you had mentioned Mallerman.
Mm-hmm.
If I recall correctly, you're co-writing a story with him.
Well, I've got a couple things going on. We've got we did a couple years ago, I Can Taste the Blood, which was me and Joe Schwartz and Josh Mailerman and Eric and Dan.
It's a great one.
We've got thank you. We've got a follow-up to that called Midnight Land, which is me, Josh, Eric, and Dan. I think we've arrived at a publisher for that. I can't really say anything about it right now because we haven't, dotted the line, dotted the I's and crossed the T's. But
yeah.
I'm pretty sure we've got it, and I think people are going to be thrilled with who we've ended up with. But Josh and I don't know that I'm able to actually talk about this too much, but Josh and I are collaborating together on a novel. So
nice.
Very good.
Just in the very, very beginnings of it, and it's going to be kind of a science fiction horror, which is we don't see a lot of that out there, so we're interested to kind of jump into that and spread our wings a little. So
I need more sci-fi horror.
Yeah,
I need more Event Horizon and Alien, and
those are the two you think of, and that's it. Like Alien, Event Horizon, and.
There's one book I read that's sci-fi horror recently, but it's more on the sci-fi part than the horror part.
Yeah. So, I got a lot of stuff going on, but it's, there's so much good stuff out there to read. It really is an embarrassment of riches, really.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is nice to say that I have a little, to be read cart that's full, and 90% of it is indie press stuff.
I don't know how you guys do it. I mean, I look at you guys and like Shane and Rich with Ink Heist and Sadie with Other Horror and people like that. I don't know how you read all this stuff.
It's tough.
Part of it is the more you read, the kind of faster you get at it.
Yeah.
And because I'm right now, on my Kindle, because I'm trying to get done with arcs on my Kindle.
Right.
I just started 69 by Tim Meyer.
Oh, nice.
Which is something else. But again, that's just once you try to dedicate a time to read, put your phone away.
Right.
Lock your phone in the other room, set apart an hour, and just go. And you're going to get faster.
I've always thought that I was a big reader, that I read a lot, but I'm a piker compared to any of you people. It becomes, it's like the thing that you love the most, reading. But now as a writer, I don't get to do as much of it as I like to do.
Right.
So it's just one of those things where you get into what you really love and then you can't really do as much of it. So.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, for me, reading has pretty well supplanted anything else. So I've got two little kids.
Yeah.
Whatever they're watching is what's on TV.
Right.
I don't get to watch any of the stuff that I want to watch. So once they're in bed, I'm ready to go to sleep, and that's usually my big reading time.
So that time is my time too.
Yeah. I try to read an hour a day. I try to make it a minimum an hour a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This week has been kind of hectic for me though, but I would say when it comes to reading, it's just really dedicating a time to it. I've always been a reader.
Mm-hmm. So me too.
When I was a kid, I had no friends, not to be a pity party, but books were my friends. Books were my friends. I read a lot of books when I was a kid. I was always an avid reader.
Right.
And reading's always been a part of my life. I went into college. I studied English literature. And everyone's like, how do you read all those books? And I'm like, I have no idea. You just gotta plug away at
right.
it.
Yeah, I have an English
do it.
My degree's in English. lot of books that I don't even remember anymore that I've plowed through.
I'll never forget, like, this is going a bit off topic, but I'll never forget when I was studying English, we had to read Absalom Absalom by William Faulkner.
Right.
Which is like, if you've never read Faulkner before, that should not be your first Faulkner book.
No, I think that's one long sentence is what I think that is.
There's one part in the book,
and I'm only halfway joking.
There's a part in the book with like a 3,000 word sentence.
Right.
Yay.
That was my first Faulkner. But I remember sitting down in class, and this girl in my class looks at the teacher and just goes, "Why are we reading this?"
That's a good question.
Seems legit.
But it's like reading with reviews, it's hard because you get sent so many arcs.
Right.
And so many books sound good.
Yes.
Or it's just like you request arcs.
Right.
And then you accidentally request too many arcs.
Yeah.
Yes. That's definitely the hard part for
it's
sure.
like dedicating what you want to devote your time to.
Yeah.
Time management.
Yep. That's the thing.
Great.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for joining
Thank you.
us.
coming
Thank
on,
you
John.
for having me. I appreciate it.
It was a really fun time.
And
Yeah.
Opened up the world to some more Clive Barker for me, so that's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm happy to help.
You're going to fall down a very big hole.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet.
Well, we'll have to do this again sometime.
Oh,
Yes,
definitely.
Definitely. I'll have to pick another crazy story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just let me know.
Will
Will
do.
do. Will do.
Thank you, John.
guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael, Matt, Scott.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Okay, you too, guys. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed the interview with John F.T. Taff. Next week, we are going to be discussing The Fearing, Books 1 and 2.